Okay, we're entering part two here of the Old Kingdom series. It's hopefully just going to be a two-parter. And if you're seeing this or catching it in the middle, if you go to the very end of this one and go to the top right-hand corner, you can click on that. It'll take you back to part one. If this should go to part three, and I don't see that it will, it'll be in your top left-hand corner. I'm about to go show you some pieces of clips of videos and see what I can get in. Some of them are going to be missing by the time I edit it to the point that you see it, even if they don't flag it. If they do flag it, I'm going to have to redo this portion again, so wish me luck. I'm going to finish off where we were because it's talking about how the leading into the first intermediate period describes the pitiful state of the country when famine stalked the land. And this was an inscription that's found in the King of Antifi, and that's in that video piece that's coming up that I'll show you pictures out of and things. And tell you more about what's going on. The most defining feature of ancient Egyptian art is its function, and that was its entire purpose of creation. Art was not made from enjoyment necessarily in the strictest sense, but rather served a role in some kind of Egyptian religion and ideology. This fact manifests itself in the artistic style even as it evolved over the dynasties. The three primary principles of that style are frontality, composite composition, and hierarchy scale and size. Illustrates this quite well in the differentials. These characteristics initiated in the early dynastic period and solidified during the Old Kingdom persisted with some adaptability throughout the entire of Egyptian history as the foundation of its art. And you can see times whenever they deviated away from it somewhat, and they're always shown as youngsters and in their prime-ish type things and stuff like that, not necessarily an old man. Even when you see the statues of Ramses and you're like, well, look, he got real old. They didn't make no statues of him when he was old. No, they show you in his prime of his life whenever that shit was hot. They're not going to show you a picture of Fat Elvis. They're going to show you a picture of that dude right, oh, yeah, right there. But there were times whenever, like Censuret and things, where they showed him very concerned. But a lot of people have said things, and I kind of agree with it, that maybe he had a little bit of a Clint Eastwood going on. And even short of Clint Eastwood giggling, he kind of looks pissed off or about to shoot somebody. All squinty and things like that. So you can see that happen. And then, of course, leading into the Amarna period, we had a different form of art right there with Akhenaten and so on. And we'll kind of touch on that just a bit. But frontality is that principle indicates that art that was viewed directly from the front. One was meant to approach a piece of art as if it was a living individual. For it was meant to be a place of manifestation, like you were talking to him, like you were going up to him in the afterlife, and you wanted to say something to him or do anything or ask him of him, just like you would an effigy of Christ or something like that. You would talk to this person. It's part of the ancestor worship that they had going on. For the act of interaction would bring forth the divine entity represented in the art and would be in your presence. It was therefore imperative whomever was represented to be as identifiable as possible. The guidelines developed in the Old Kingdom and later grid system developed in the Middle Kingdom ensured that art was axial, symmetrical, and the later grid system, which is based on sacred geometry, both of these are, system was developed in the Middle Kingdom and ensured that the art was axial, symmetrical, and proportional, and most importantly, reproduce and therefore recognizable forms. But yet we know also that there were some fat people and there were some fat kids and they didn't draw kids right and everything and all this type of stuff about it, but it was pretty damn good for its time. And being able to etch that out in surfaces, whether you etch it like this where you're etching into it, but then a bas relief is another level altogether. Like here that you see that surface that's cut around in the earliest of dynasties, and I'll show you something else right before we go off to the deal and start showing you those Caucasian Egyptians and all that stuff in a minute. But this niched architecture is shown in Sumerian art and in their art all the way through this period. After the first period, it goes away because it never comes back after the great catastrophe that ends this era and heralds the first intermediate period. Takes them a couple of 100 years to rebound. Happens. It was therefore imperative that whoever representative looked as identifiable as possible and recognizable, but they're always done in a special way. I mean, you can see that in Greek art too, where they've made them they ancient Photoshop, seriously, in a way, because they all have to fit a certain mold. And then because the art was somewhat primal at the very first of parts, whenever people were able to do much better art, they still kept that concept going on for a few thousand years, and it's quite amazing. People look at this longevity that they had of it, that they kept this. By the end of it, with everybody else's art in Greek coming on strong, it kind of looked cartoonish, but during its time, it was incredible. Composite composition, the second principle, also contributes to a goal of identification. Multiple perspectives were used in order to ensure that the onlooker could determine precisely what they saw. Though Egyptian art almost always includes descriptive texts along with it, literacy rates were not that high, so the art gave another method to communicating the same information. And you can see that somewhat. You can look at some of them and you can kind of see what's going on. Others, there's strangeness to it, but you can bet that they were told about these things. And it's not like anybody was really literate. I've had other people describe it where they would have had the knowledge of a second or third grader, and these big words are way too much for me and everything, but they already knew the concepts. And you could look at some picture like over here in the deal and turn around and go, okay, this is the thing about Christmas, and there's Santa Claus, and here's the present, and here's this thing, and there's a dance of the sugar plum fairies, and this is this. Could they read it? No, they couldn't sit and read it off to you, but they knew what the story had to do with, at least. Most all people, not that they're running around in all these temples constantly necessarily either, but they would have had moments, and they go and give praise, they go and give and put things there and stuff, so they know. And you wouldn't be doing things just dumb like, I don't know what any of this is, but here you go. No, have some common sense. One of the best examples of composite composition is the human form. It's almost two-dimensional relief. The head, legs, and feet are seen in profile or sideways, while the torso always faces directly frontwards. Also, the eyeball is always forwards, and it's another way that you can see that they've done it. Another common example is an aerial view of a building or a location, looking like you're looking down on it like a hawk or Horus. The third principle, hierarchy of scale, illustrates relative importance in society. The larger the figure, the more important the individual, i.e. the king is usually the largest aside from deities, but a lot of times because he's shown as a deity, you show him at that same size. Similar in size equated similarly in position somewhat, and however, this is not to say that physical differences weren't shown as well, for women, for example, is shown as smaller than men a little bit, and children retain, though, adult features and proportions, but are substantially just smaller in size. And somebody's done a special off this whole dissertation. It's on this TED Talk type thing, and it's basically about babies in art and how they could not draw babies in art. And I went into it a little bit on one that I did about muses, and it cross-linked on my deal, and I've never redone it again. But about cherubim and muses, and it took till the Renaissance almost before they were doing babies correctly, other than a few situations where it was real recognizable. Other ways it was pretty screwed up. Aside from the three primary conventions, there are several characteristics that can help date a piece of particular time frame. Proportions of the human figure are one of the most distinctive, as they vary between kingdoms. And so this is one way when you can look at the art, and if you know what you're talking about, you can go, oh, okay, well, this must be from this kingdom or that kingdom, because they're using different scales during each kingdom and stuff. And so you can tell that they've had a little bit of change in those scribes, which we're going to talk about shortly, but it's the same thing. But perhaps somebody did some more geometry and stuff and figured out, hey, I can make a face out of all these little circles and all these things, and we still can use that today whenever you draw in proportion of face. Whenever you get to, you can draw things, you can't draw a face. When you find out how you draw a face, it's a little different than you think, and no wonder your face drawing Doesn't look so accurate. Pardon me. Let me get a drink. Ah, lemonade. Um, Old Kingdom male figures have characteristically broad shoulders, or a little than normal, and a long torso with obvious musculature. On the other hand, females are narrow with shoulders and waist, and longer legs and shorter torsos. However, in the Sixth Dynasty, the male figures lose their muscularity, or not their muscularity, and their shoulders narrow, though somewhat. I also tend to get much larger, and the eyes so get larger. In order to maintain the consistency of these proportions, the Egyptians used a series of 8 guidelines to divide the body. They occur in the following locations, and remember this when we start talking about sacred geometry and everything, how it works out. But the top of the head, the hairline, the base of the neck, the underarms, the tip of the elbow or the bottom of the rib cage, the top of the thigh, at the bottom of the buttock, the knee, and the middle of the lower leg, which are all set in proportion in the human body. And literally, you can just put a bunch of cubes and draw certain pieces. And you know how they made Mount Rushmore giant off of taking a little piece, a sculpture, and measuring little pieces of it, and then making a little piece of that, which is huge now, to that. And once they did it all together, wham, looks like Washington, just like the statue over here. Kind of that concept wherever you're broken in, and so it leaves you a commonality of look. Was there somebody that was a little short, and somebody was, oh, sure there was. They don't draw them like that. Everybody's drawn under these ideals, right? The broad shoulders that appeared in the Fifth Dynasty constituted roughly 1/3 of that length as well, and these proportions not only help with the identification and representations and the reproduction of art, but also tie into the Egyptian ideal of order, or ma'at, where tied into a solar aspect of their religion and their sun god. You know, these are all sun worshiping people. Think about hippies and people in the 70s and 80s that were all running around getting suntans and even put on suntan lotion rather than sunblock nowadays. And these inundations of the Nile. Through the above concepts apply mostly, not of all, figurines in Egyptian art, there are additional characteristics that apply to the representations of the king. Their appearance was not an exact rendering of the king's visage, as I said, though kings are somewhat identifiable through looks alone. Identification could be supplied by inscriptions or context. A huge, more important part of a king's portrayal was about the ideal of the office of kingship, which were dependent on that time period. Old Kingdom was considered the golden age for Egypt, and everybody looked back at it, a grandiose height to which all future kingdoms aspired to. And so once it had fallen and then come back up, they were all trying to get back. People have shown so much of the artifacts that were found in the very first dynasties, and these schist bowls and things that are made that are just parts, because that's gone, and these crystal blue eyes that I'll show you in a second they used to make, and all these things and these arts were all lost. And it only took a couple hundred years for them to fade out, and they came back, and some people probably almost don't notice it, but if you get deep into it, you notice it. And you'll notice something else about architecture I'll show you in just a minute. The Old Kingdom was considered that golden age, though, and as such, the king was portrayed as a young, vital, with features that agree with the standards of beauty of the time. The musculature seen in male figures was also applied to kings. A royal rite, the Jubilee Run, which is established during the Old Kingdom, involved the king running around a group of markers that symbolized the geographic borders of Egypt, and that also it symbolized that he was able to still perform and so on, and you had to do it ever so often. It's amazing. They had to run around this thing. This was meant to be a demonstration of the king's physical vigor, which determined his capacity to continue reigning. This idea of kingly youth and strength are pervasive in the Old Kingdom and thus shown in the art. No one really has any direct contact that I can think of somebody that couldn't run it around, got a stitch in his side, and all of a sudden they kicked him out of being king and made it somebody else. But at the same time, and you can imagine they probably gave a little bit of levity to Ramses when he was reaching into his 90s. But sculpture was a major product of the Old Kingdom. The position of the figures in this period was mostly limited to sitting or standing, either with feet together or striding pose, like coming forth by day. Group statues of the king with either gods or family members, typically with his wife and children, were also common, but also with gods, especially ones of the afterlife. And these are the ones we see a lot of because they are the ones that are in the tombs that were locked up for all time. And then there it is. It was not just the subject of sculpture that was important, but also the material. The use of hard stone, such as gneiss or greywack, schist, and granite, were relatively common in the Old Kingdom. The color of the stone had a great deal of symbolism and was chosen deliberately. Starting out with only 4 colors were distinguished in the ancient Egyptian language: black, green, red, and white, and blue, for Wajet refers to blue, like the Wajet eye, an eye of Horus, that's always blue. Black was distinguished in the ancient Egyptian language due to the color of the soil after the Nile flood, and symbolizing rebirth that goes with Horus. For the next color was green with vegetation and rebirth, and we see that symbolized. And Osiris is always done in green color. Well, you see him in blue sometimes too. Well, that's that old starting color that actually turned from green to blue, and it had like copper in it and stuff like that, and that was caused it to oxidate. And you ever seen copper you're on your battery where it'll oxidate and it'll have this bluishness to it, and it threw it off. It also shows you that they eventually gotten in older tombs and older drawings they had done with this special stuff the scribes were doing, which I did a video on and talked about how the scribe makes these special things and pass it down family to family, father to son, and all this. But they must have found that that green wasn't hacking it, and it turned blue, so they made a new green, and they also came up with Egyptian blue that we know of. And weird thing about it is it phosphoresces under blue light, and a lot of the old statues that look like they have no painting on them whatsoever, you can flash over them and they have blue eyes. I've done a video about that too, but that's different. And so that's green that kind of changes. The other one is red, and it's associated with many things, but the sun and its regenerative cycle. People are also shown drawn in red ochre color, and females are usually drawn pale, and that's because of purity. It's more white, but also that symbology is carried all the way through to modern times, and where a woman was kept pale and a man was out doing the work and stuff, so he'd end up being redneck, and the woman would try to stay pale somewhat. We've lost that through the hippie age, but not too long ago, people remember they used to powder their faces, and man, you look back in Elizabethan England and they would try to chalk white themselves, males and females, wearing wigs, all kinds of crap. But recently in the hippie age, we started sun tanning and getting dark, and the idea was like, you never got a tan before unless you went to Hawaii or did on vacation, and so suddenly it became a symbol or status thing that you could go to a vacation, or you could do these things, or that perhaps you were going out swimming and had a little bit of a life. And so people started tanning out the ass, but then everybody jumped on that, and oh, you need sunblock, and now people don't do it as much, if at all. And I don't think you can find suntan oils around too much, but it sure was done all summer long. But then that red ochre males and pale females you can find in Greek art, Minoans art, Etruscans, the Mitanni people all the way around through there. All you got to do is look it up, and you'll see these same symbologies and stuff. And the last color, of course, is white with purity, and it's the reason women are drawn as more pale. It's the reason for the skirt to be pale, sometimes the top of the bonnet of the cap of Upper and Lower Egypt. One's red, one's white, and so on, that you may be familiar with. So the statue of Minkari, Hathor, and Anput is an example of typical Old Kingdom sculpture. The 3 figures display frontality and axiality while fitting with the proportions of this time period, and it's made out of greywack, and this greywack came from the eastern desert in Egypt and is therefore associated with rebirth and the rising of the sun in the east. And we'll take a closer look at this, and you can see that they're Caucasian people, but you can also tell that they look almost like sisters and so on. Well, These are gods. This is your goddesses. And he's stepping forth as God, holding hands here, right, and coming forth by day. Gods associated with Venus would be heralding the sun coming up. Venus comes up, then the sun comes up, and at night it does the same type thing. People have noticed this for years and stuff. So Venus is helping him in, and then the other one above here, it's got this. Oh, they're worshiping the devil. It's a devil. Now this is the sign of Hathor. This is a cow, right? And his chin. I'm wearing a bowling pin on my head. Whatever you want to say. You can see his strength in action or whatever. People say the women are naked. Hey, during this period right here, no nipples on these type of statues, but the wood ones have them. You might see that in a minute. But, and of course, he's holding hands here. But one way to show you, the women will look like they're wearing nothing. He's shirtless, but if we get down here, we can see that they do have a cuff to it, and they're just wearing that fine gossamer fabric. That's very thin. You can almost still see that she has a rounded neck right here. Pull away now, you can kind of see it. Don't see it over here really at all. So anyhow, I'm going to show you one picture, and then we're out to see more of those Caucasian Egyptians and what is believed in a three-part figure out Sherlock Holmes situation out of science, the reason for the collapse that happened. Because a lot of people talk about, the famine and things, and it caused a little bit of a civil war. But if you look at the amount of drought and famine that went on in the world, and especially across this area and parts of North America, people have said, oh, well, this has got to have something to do with either an impact or a giant volcano output. And what I was going to show you up here, other than the pictures, so we were talking about Djoser here, right? And how this used to be just a one level, and then he had the other one stacked up upon it. And there's a proportion to this, by the way, and if you look at the slant, that just makes a pyramid. It just hasn't been smoothed off, but they're rebuilding it. But better yet, that same time, which you think that they're just starting to make a pyramid and they're getting it figured out, and the kids playing with blocks, this was made during his same reign. Now, if I was to told you that they put this up there and it's a modern museum and they put some of the stuff in it and everything, and they're not quite finished with it, you'd probably believe me. But this thing dates from Djoser, and it has an architecture that, if you look at it, it looks modern. It looks Europeanoid. It looks like it doesn't fit in whatsoever. Well, go a couple of people after this, and everything goes to crap. And then it has a hard time coming back. Whenever it does, nobody grasps this architecture. And it's got fluted columns in front of it and everything, and an overhang here, and the arch, and the way it looks. And this steps down classically, kind of like the Alamo, and down in between and up around each one. And even the little facades, the way you walk in, and it's kind of modern. You don't just walk in. You walk around here and walk in. Yeah, pretty neat. So let's go check out these Caucasian Egyptians that made things up here. I'm not making things up on you. What we'll look at is those scribes, for they're the ones that helped to make all this happen and stuff. And all I've really done is gone and looked up blue-eyed Egyptian scribes, right? And so you can see all these different stock photos of these guys, and they have these crystal blue eyes. They'll be a lot better picture to show up. But there's a whole bunch of them, and blonde-haired, red-haired ones too, but it's such a small picture there. Here's one of them with these crystal blue eyes. You can tell that's Caucasian, and this is the earliest of dynasties. This is the only time this actually happened. Ka-Upper, and he actually looks kind of like my dad with no hair. He's got blue eyes. My dad did too. I'm not saying, hey, Irish people, blah, blah, blah. I'm telling you, these people were blue-eyed Caucasians. From the earliest dynasties through the pre-dynastic, like Ginger, the blonde-haired Caucasian pre-dynastic Ghibelline mummy they found. Here's Nofret and Rahotep. That's from the earliest of dynasties here. They have crystal blue eyes. And that's the picture we were looking at right there, huh? But, man, I thought they were going to show more of them. Let's look here at different ones. So here's Mitri. That's one of the better ones. So he really stares you down whenever you're going in there. But there's the seated scribe that I did the video about. This is Hor-Aha. He's supposed to be the second pharaoh ever, right after Menez or Narmer. And people have said that they've got that mixed up, that this is Scorpion and he's this and he's that. And that's the reason they couldn't figure it out a long time ago. And it sounds pretty pleasing. And all the first statues of the Ka statues were made out of sacred wood, right? And this is made out of the sacred wood, although they found this in a 12th dynasty tomb. And then they say, well, shortly after that, there's this Hor-Abre, and so it must be that. But it says that it's not. And you remember the old stories about when they went in there and they had all the pharaohs lined up and they were all decked out? This would have been an example of perhaps something like that, but all the other ones are long gone. Here's those crystal blue eyes staring at you. There's the man that copper, almost sounds like copper. That's my dad. Different ones, but here's another one. So you can tell they're all Caucasians, and these are between the 4th to 6th dynasty. And Nefertiti, although she has one eye missing, the other piece is blue. Have to get down and cut the light at it just right because her eyelid's hanging over it, but it's dark blue also. But that's one of the latest ones they ever find out of it, for it seems to be between the first few dynasties up through the 12th dynasty and just peters out right there. And the reason they give it the 12th dynasty is because of that Hor-Aha. And if they give it to Aubrey, if they don't give it to Aubrey, then it literally goes not even to the 12th dynasty at all. Like they might have had a handful of them left over that they made in the first old dynasty and used them somehow, or somebody took one of these statues and mucked the eyes out of it and used them later for somebody like Nefertiti and so on too. Is entirely possible. So let's go and show you some more of this. So here we have a little ad thing that was in this, and this right here is the great-grandmother of King Tut. She's a blonde-haired woman. This is what her face looks like, right? And her daughter is Queen Tai. Let me shrink that back out. Queen Tai. And so people question that, but how could that blonde-haired lady have had this baby? Well, hold on a second. Here's Queen Tai. And people have talked, oh, that's an afro and all this, that stuff. This is made out of yew wood, and that's lighter than pine whenever you normally make it, not 3,000 years ago, people. And this is a silver veily doil over, and under it, she's got this little pharaoh hat. You can kind of see it poking at it a little bit. She's got this little mini princess pharaoh hat onto it. It's pretty cool with this handmade silver doily around to it, woven, like lace kind of situation. Here's another picture of her off a wall. Here's a picture of King Tut, and I don't know if that makes anybody question anything, but he's Caucasian, so what if he's made out of red ochre? All the other depictions that they go along with it, or if you look at that, you don't have too much of a problem. But somebody retaliated on this thread had a problem with it. Here's a skull's shape, and you can see the non-prognathicism that he's got, and kind of a flat face and just a little buck teeth. So here's more of a flat teeth without buck teeth. Here's more mongoloids look, and then you can see this prognostic jaw sticking out there, and now there weren't black people. In fact, this is the grandfather of King Tut. Watch it roll through here. They say this is Joseph of the Bible. Now, this is 18th dynasty, right? And then here again is Thuya, the great-grandmother of King Tut. A little overbite on her and so on, but her hair done out, and it's Caucasian hair, and well, I guess you can tell it real easily right there. And they're blonde, and people have said, oh, the Natron did that and everything. And you're like, well, why are these people auburn, black-haired, da-da-da, there's a blonde, there's a redhead. So they tested it with all colors of people's hair, including black people's and everything, and nobody changed a single bit. It doesn't really work that way. It taxidermy. Well, why is their skin so dark? That basically they shellac them after the thing's over with, but whenever they put them through the natron process, it fast beef jerkies them. And I don't know if you've seen what pink beef looks like after you put it and turn it into beef jerky, but it turns dark as hell, and then they put shellac on them. But you can tell the phenotype of the people, but some people still want to act like they're confused about it somehow, even when genetics has come out and all kinds of other things, you know, and these huge long-haired wigs they used to wear, and like people like to wear wigs nowadays and stuff and mimic Caucasian hair, so they go, look, and it's like, well, that's because you're doing this now. I mean, come on, give it a break, please. But no, no break is given. Here's another picture of those eyes. Wabang, and they really look like they're staring at you and following you around the room. And another depiction of him. And they even did it to some cats back in the day, so they were willing to do it to everything, but lost this technology, and I'll show you why in just a second. There's horahas, and hey, they've noticed that they turn all gray, and then whenever you get at certain angles, they turn blue, and when you get facing right on, snap. That's horaha, but you can see this one's kind of blue and that one's kind of gray. But it's the way that they did it, and they put the lens and a socket behind it and so on, and it makes it look like a real human eye. Like those paintings that follow you around the room. That's incredible. So let's go ahead and go to this. There's a couple more things I've got pulled up that can show you those incredible Caucasian Egyptians, but well, let's just do one more. So there's that grandmother of King Tut, and that she was blonde again, but that's 18th dynasty. I'm talking about way back when. And so I showed you all those crystal blue-eyed people and everything, you know, and so on. But and I've got all these pulled up, guys, so I can do all these different videos. Where is this? Don't tell me it ruined. Oh my God, I lost it. Should have been here already. No, it's coming up. Oh my goodness. Tut's Hidden Treasures, and it shows some Shabti dolls with blue eyes. Yeah, I can't keep a secret. But there's all these other things they've got with it. I've gone all the way past it. You can see all these things and articles I've got pulled up. Some of them are multiple. There's that Tut's Hidden Treasures, but sorry about this, guys. I'm guessing that, and it should be right off in here, and I'm guessing it's the one that says YouTube. Let's see if it goes to it. It's trying not to. There we go. Is this going to be it? Or am I going to have to search it up? That's called like Egypt's Dark Ages too. And I would like y'all to watch the whole thing if you can.
In the arid coastal
This
region of
is
South
not
America,
it.
known as the Atacama Desert between the Andes Mountains and the Pacific Ocean.
Egypt Dark Ages, see if I can, Darkest Hour, that's what it was. See if it'll show up just off that. Egypt, blue-eyed Sumerians. Egypt, Darkest Hour, that's what it's called, people. Egypt, the Darkest Hour. Wow, it's trying to lock up on me. Now it just sucks it all the way back. Alright, Darkest Hour, let's see it. Secrets of the Dead. It's on PBS and KTC and stuff, but they're gonna lock it if I do.
A moment of chaos in ancient Egypt. The fact that the pyramid was dropped means the government was losing control. Was the empire threatened by violence?
All the evidence points to the fact that these were soldiers.
So, a little overview here real quick. That they showed the little bodies, and she's saying these were soldiers and stuff, is a mass grave that she's going to go off and get into. They even talk about how whenever the Egypt was starting out, it was still green and fading, and what made it fade real fast is something that happened. Let me see if I can go ahead and jump here into it, because they have a primer for it that's long as hell, as you can see. But really just want to get to the point where she's in the tomb for a second. So here they are digging out that tomb, and nobody's been in there forever. They closed it up, and nobody's been allowed to get in there forever. Actually, that's just the 1 second shot of it. The primer's later. And now she's inside the tomb, and there are just little pieces of body everywhere. And it's a mass burial, and it's not just a family mass burial. No. There's hundreds of people inside of this, just strewn out, and they had this whole little thing set up. And what she shows is that these guys were basically wounded and had their skulls all cracked in and stuff, and they had all died in battle. And here you can see the Caucasian, and she picks up even a couple of the skulls, and see if I can catch a moment of it. But in doing so, she reveals these x-rays that she brings with her all the way out there, and she pulls them up and shows all this different damage that's on them and how they had been, thwacked. She talks about how it's in a great war, and then they talk about how there was a time whenever this place was still somewhat green. And I'm not going to be able to show you much of the footage here, guys, but we'll take a gander at pieces of it.
Far bigger. If anything goes wrong with the mine, then it would be famine and chaos.
And they basically describe the fact that, they live off the Nile. So if anything was to go wrong with the Nile, they'd live off, things would go to chaos. But luckily it didn't seem to really happen, and they had control of it and knew when the seasons happened. But here's a time whenever they were just figuring it all out, and certain things happened. Well, it's not their fault. It's not like they didn't have it figured out. It's like, and they call it Egypt's darkest hour. It's like something devastating happened, and they're trying to figure out what it is. Oh, is this gonna? Yeah, this is not even the whole thing. Okay, I'll find it. Bam, here we go. There's even the one I watched, because it's got the red line on it. Same information all the way through, except for instead of being 15 minutes, it's an hour's worth of stuff.
Viciously. So this is not someone.
So here again is her telling you that all these different people and how they've been shattered, but also she notices she grabs an arm right there and puts it up to herself and says, "This is a big old guy," and all these things. And then she shows this one arm that's left here, an arm with the hand, and this right here is that arm strap that you use whenever you're using archery, and they're still left on them. In fact, she's got some of their pictures of them showing that they still got the arrows stuck in them, right? And then this guy tells you about the art, about the hieroglyphics that are telling you that everybody goes into famine and it all goes to crap, and that it actually says so, and that this is actually written by one of the governors, and that nobody's really going with the king anymore, and here comes civil unrest. And then it isn't really written what happened after that, and then you get the intermediate period and some little crap happened, and then all of a sudden come out of it like, nothing happened, right? But in reality, it kind of tells you just right there. And they want to tell you that at one time, this whole thing was a savanna. Let's see how much of this I can get. Gonna let him talk.
Life. But are these decorations enough to prove these animals lived nearby?
And they're saying, well, this was a savanna at one time, and it was this lush or lusher, and especially after the rain. Wow. And what you see is them throwing the pyramids, and these are pyramids that are all crushed down now, but they're saying they used to be white-faced like this with a capstone onto them. You could have seen them. And look at this huge herd of gazelles that are here. Isn't that neat? But they're going to tell you that it used to be green. We're at 40 minutes, guys. It's going to go into the last third part, but it won't be 40 minutes.
Climate was so different. Or are these carvings simply fanciful illustrations of animals seen while on expedition?
And so Egyptology can't figure that out. But what can figure it out is other forms of science that usually people don't associate with Egyptology. And so one part of it, though, they can help with in a correlating data. Here she is seeing all of these crocodiles that they ended up mummifying. Here's some of them themselves and wrapped in that cocoon effect. And all of these are seen as a different type. You can see this guy touching this one here. These are a different type of crocodile and nowhere near as aggressive as the Nile crocodile we know today. It's very much like the saltwater crocodile. Sure, they're mean as hell and might take a kid and all these things, but adults and stuff, and they can sit and raise them. And this was what was done with them. And interesting effect, there's one of them mummified that's there. And so she goes into it and she tells you that that's Sobek, right? And that at one time, let's see if it catches this at the right moment, that it was all green.
5,000 years ago, the Sahara Desert was actually a savanna, crisscrossed by a network of interconnected waterways, which allowed crocodiles to move freely throughout North Africa.
Okay, so then she shows you here shortly after this, she's got a map, and she says, well, everybody's trying to figure it out, and they knew it used to be green at one time, and there's all these oases that were down there, and I just missed it. Or did I? Yeah, I just missed it. Here's her map, and in that map, she puts little dots on there. Of the time when the pyramids were, and there's all these guys, all the crocodiles. I'm sorry, I can't get this thing to react to me correctly. Oh, and it came and went. I'm asking for it to jump around. Kids are probably back there on the internet. Anyhow, she shows that this creature is really known from one place in Niger, way over in the Maghreb and basically in Moroccan area. They find these smaller type, not as big as the Nile ones, and that they had raised these for that purpose and kept them basically in a zoo, like I've done a video about recently. And in doing so, they figured out, well, this used to have a river system running through it all the way over, and if you look at the ancient Herodotus' maps, they thought the Nile came from over here. Actually, it actually bent it around. They don't show sub-Saharan Africa or anything below this really exists that they know about. And that if you look at archaeology, they found before Egypt ever existed, the Gobero site and a few others through here have been showing that these people, they called Tenarians and so on, were actually living out in the middle of the area that nobody could live any now, and that turned to oases and then shrunk up. And as it did, there were people that were there, and there's cave art that's there that was shown in the English Patient, but I used it in a video talking about mermaids of the Green Sahara, because it shows people with fishtails swimming all around and swimming in the Mediterranean with whales and all kinds of stuff. It's like a mermaid depiction. Go to my site and look up Mermaids of the Green Sahara. I thought it was a decent video. Not near as long as these. So they look at Elephantine and they can see that it used to be two different islands and a marshy area in between, but then the Nile sucked down some 15 foot, and all of a sudden that ended real quick. And even when it flooded through this whole period of nearly 100 years, it all dried up, and so they built in the middle of it. And even though the Nile flooded after this point, it never quite got back going, because of all the places it fed off of all were drying up too and not having as much winters and things like that. So elephantine used to be